योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिमानतोऽस्मि। लये सम्बोधयेच्चित्तं विक्षिप्तं शमयेत् पुनः सकाशायं विजानीयात् समप्राप्तं न चालयेत्. Om. So we have, before we took a little break, we had concluded our study of the first chapter. So is there any comment, observation, question on the first chapter before we get into the second chapter? Any questions? And of course, you can interrupt me also. So let me start with a question. Who is competent for the teaching of the first chapter? Because as you know, in our Shastra, we always say for studying anything, we have to have an examination of adhikari, who is competent. Then the subject matter we know is chitta vritti nirodha. Vishaya is known. Sambandha is also known, because when chitta vritti nirodha is required, then you have to study Yoga Shastra. And then phala is also known, that is to get absorption and samadhi. But there is a little gray area as to who is really the adhikari. So that's my question to the floor. Because if we determine the adhikari for each of the chapters, then we can actually connect it or link it to our own experience. So the entire Samadhi Pada, as we have seen, is a lot of theory. Of course, there is some amount of practical application also, or instruction also is there, like Abhyasa Vairagya, and then you have to develop Maitri Karuna, etc. But then you can see that the adhikari, I will also answer my own question as I understand the first chapter. The adhikari is the one who has attained ekagra chitta. So if you look at the whole tenor of the teaching, there is one undercurrent assumption that this person already has the ability for complete razor sharp focus. So presuming that he will say, okay, you control your mind, chitta vritti nirodha, and then you are able to do that, and then he presumes that by the mere instruction, abhyasa vairagya, you practice for a long time uninterrupted. And so you are already used to focus, continue that. So the adhikari is really one who has got ekagra chitta. So we have seen in the states of the chitta that there is kshipta, mudha, vikshipta, ekagra and niruddha. In these states, we dismiss the kshipta and vikshipta, probably the kshipta and the mudha, not the vikshipta. The kshipta and the mudha states of mind we just dismiss, saying that, until you stabilize your, at least get a little bit of control on yourself, you are not my subject. This is why I also mentioned Yoga Sutra is not for those whose mind is compromised. And that's the business of psychiatrists and other disciplines. Here it is for a normal functioning person. And in a normal functioning person, we can classify into two kinds, that is those who have attained ekagra chitta, because we see that in society. There are a lot of people who are very focused. In fact, they know their life's mission and they dedicate decades of their life to achieve that one particular goal. And we have seen that, and there are quite a number of people. And so Yoga Sutra first chapter is for them. Because even though they have got enormous amount of ekagra chitta, manashanti may not be there for them. So they may be seeking actually peace of mind. And for them, you get into the samadhi state. So basically, first chapter is where an ekagra chitta person is taken to the samadhi state, the ultimate purpose of yoga. But what about the vikshipta people? For the sake of vikshipta people, the second chapter is addressed. So the adhikari for sadhana pada is one who has got the vikshipta state, that is, he is capable of ekagra chitta, capable of controlling his body and mind complex, but the one-pointed focus is not there. So while the first chapter leads an ekagra chitta person to samadhi, my submission is that the sadhana pada will lead the vikshipta state of mind to the ekagra chitta state of mind. And therefore, if we look at the structure of this sadhana pada, you can see that out of the 55 sutras that we have got, we can classify it in the following way. We can see in the first 3 sutras, an introduction is given saying that for a vikshipta mind, what is required. So Kriya Yoga is interested, Tapaswadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana is introduced, and then we have to identify the nature of the vikshipta state. For that, the sutra number 4 to 9 identifies kleshas, and these are the reasons why a person gets a unsteady mind. Then obviously, having stated the problem from sutra number 10 to 16, what are the obstacles that come and how to remove those obstacles are dealt with. Again, you see, all this is addressed to the vikshipta state. Then we come to the relationship of the observer and the world. In sutra number 17 to 27, it is dealt with. So what causes vikshipta state of mind? It is oneself, and therefore the observer is a point of interest, and it is the world which can cause us disturbance, another point of view for creating a vikshipta state. So the interaction between the observer and the world is the cause for the vikshipta state, and therefore Ashtanga Yoga has to be introduced in sutra number 28 and 53. Ashtanga Yoga is introduced. Yama Niyama, Asana Pranayama Pratyahara, Dharana Dhyana Samadhi. And actually up to Pratyahara only it introduces Dharana Dhyana Samadhi is pushed into the Vibhuti Yoga. There is an interesting reason why the entire Ashtanga Yoga is not discussed in the second chapter, because as long as the vikshipta state of mind is capable of proper engagement with the world and the skill to disengage with the world when required, the vikshipta state has become calm. So again, who is the adhikari for the second chapter? The adhikari is one whose mind is vikshipta. Who is the adhikari for the first chapter? One who is already in ekagra state. So between vikshipta state and ekagra state, how the transition takes place, and that adhikari is for the third chapter, and therefore dharana, dhyana and samadhi is pushed to the third chapter. So that is the architecture of how the text is organized. So it is very critical that at the beginning of each chapter, whether we are studying Yoga Sutra or whether we are studying Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads, determining who is the adhikari helps us quite a lot in evaluating where we are and what is the next step we can go to. Otherwise, suppose we just say, I have got to do Chitta Vritti Nirodha, how is that possible? It is impossible to get Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So the first introduction that the chapter we have got to examine is, I whose mind is in a vikshipta state, I am the adhikari for the second chapter. So that determination is important even before we enter into the second chapter. So having said that, we have found that the distance to be traveled from the vikshipta state to the ekagra state is extremely long. The distance is very, very wide, is so far away. It looks that it is near, but it's really very far away. So up front, Patanjali Maharshi introduces the concept of tapas. So tapas is the first prescription as far as the vikshipta mind is concerned. Tapas actually means to heat. So we have to subject our mind to the heat of thinking. It comes from the root alochana, to think, heat of thinking. So there is a beautiful saying, yat duram, yat duraradhyam, yaccha dure vyavasthitam, tat sarvam tapasa sadhyam, tapohi duratikramaha. So the meaning is, yat duram, whatever is far away. For me who is in the vikshipta state, ekagra state is at a great distance. So, but I have to cross this distance to reach the ekagra state, yat duram. And to remain stable in ekagra state is also very, very challenging. And the ekagra state is not easy to sustain, and therefore it is duraradhyam, yat duraradhyam. And I have to go towards the ekagra state. Ekagra state does not come to me. It is not like we will meet halfway. I start the process and the success will come back to me. It is not like worshipping God. In fact, you can see in Bible as well as in Bhagavad Gita, statements are made by Bhagavan by saying, you take a step towards me, I will take 10 steps towards you, I'll come to 10 steps towards you. Ekagra state is not available like that. It is duraradhyam. To stay in that state is very difficult. And dure vyavasthitam, it is actually situated very far and it does not move towards me. I have to move towards that. Tat sarvam tapasa sadhyam, all that it is possible by tapas. But tapohi duratikramaha. But what is the problem with tapas? Tapas itself is not possible. This is the toughest situation that we have in trying to achieve the ekagra state. Duratikramaha in Sanskrit means insurmountable, very difficult, but there is also another meaning for duratikramaha, it is inevitable. So without tapas, it is impossible to bring a vikshipta state into even a semblance of ekagrata. Not necessarily full-fledged ekagrata, even a semblance of ekagrata. Why? What is the problem? So what have we understood about the mind? It has got manas. which is an emotional part. The emotional part means it is sankalpa vikalpatmakam manaha. One of the definitions given is sankalpa vikalpatmakam manaha. That means it unreasonably, unfounded by logic. It will just take some decisions, emotional decisions, sankalpa, and it takes unfounded decisions of not to do things, even if it has to be done, all purely driven by emotions. Some people call it as instinct, some people call it as intuition. Intuition, instinct may be successful sometimes, sometimes it may not be. In fact, we know that when somebody tries to invent something new, he uses a sankalpa vikalpatmakam manaha, 100 trials, 1 success probably. Therefore, it is duraradhyam. One must have the ability to sustain effort to do 100 times. Secondly, we have the buddhi. What does the buddhi do? It looks at objects. And when it looks at objects, it gets attracted. This is called dravya spuranam, recognition of objects. So recognition of the world, that itself can become a barrier for ekagrata. So we have then together, what does the buddhi and the manas do? It does encourage our indriyas to become active. So sankalpa vikalpatmaka manas, dravya spurana buddhi will actually encourage our indriyas to get into contact with the world. So there goes the ekagrata. But now how to break this? So samshaya is the one that first happens. This samshaya happens in buddhi. So buddhi has to be trained to doubt. The training that buddhi has to be given in tapas is, this engagement with the world, does it give me ekagra chitta or not? Or does it distract me? See, there itself it is not easy. Because as soon as we come into contact with the world, there is always a temptation to get absorbed in the world. When we get absorbed in the world, what happens is inversion happens. Inversion is called viparyaya. We have seen the definition of viparyaya. So samshayatmaka buddhi will generate viparyaya. In viparyaya, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because suppose Patanjali Maharshi says, you do Ishvara Pranidhana for the Ekagra Chitta, then immediately we will ask, is there God? The moment we ask, is there God, we are changing the subject. The Maharshi is telling us, you worship God, you will get focus. Now we will say, is there God? And immediately what does this samshayatmaka buddhi will do? It will do viparyaya or inversion and say, there is no God. And therefore the project failed. And hence it is duraradhyam. So what is the origin of this samshaya? Ignorance is the origin of this samshaya. It's the biggest klesha which he picks up. That is avidya. Even before we test whether Ishvara Pranidhana is going to be successful or not, we get into samshaya, and therefore ekagra chitta becomes impossible. Because even that one object on which we can focus and concentrate is also not available because of samshaya, which is caused by klesha. So how to break this barrier? This can be broken by a strategy called smriti. Smriti means remembering Guru and Shastra Vakya. In other words, the first requisite for tapas is suspension of disbelief. When suspension of disbelief is done, and the teacher says tapaswadhyaya ishvara pranidhana is the first step for bringing focus of our mind, then ishvara pranidhana is possible, is confirmed by Shastrabdhyena, which is Swadhyaya, and for Swadhyaya we need tapas. And thus three interrelated strategies are introduced. So when suspension of disbelief takes place, Guru Shastra Vakya is processed and then tapas can be started. And what happens when there is tapas? What will be the metric to see if my mind is getting over the vikshipta state and walking towards this distant object called ekagra chitta? First and foremost is my mind becoming more clear. Clarity of thinking, is it happening? That's called swachhatvam. First metric. Then when the mind is not muddled, when there is clarity in the mind, the second measurement is that the mind becomes peaceful. Shantatvam. When the mind becomes peaceful, the third change takes place. That means avikaritvam. Avikaritvam means the mind does not go through the vikaras. What are the vikaras? Samshaya, the biggest vikara, and that is gone. So clarity, calmness, free from aberrations, these three are the measurements whether we are in the direction of the far away ekagra chitta. So there was, many of you might have heard of T. Chaudhaya. He was a very great violinist, Sangeeta Kalanidhi, and an extraordinary violinist. And then he has also accompanied M.S. Subbulakshmi. And then incidentally, his grandson became a matinee idol in Kannada. Ambarish, the actor, was T. Chaudaya's grandson. And not only that, closer home, T. Chaudaya's brother, T. Puttasomaya, was an extraordinary vocalist and musician. And he was my sister Nirmala's guru. She learned from him. So this T. Chaudhaya, once he was invited to play violin in Coimbatore. And this was a story that was told by my teacher, Dr. D.V.G. And then he was hosted by a physician there, Dr. Srinivas Rao. And then it was a very, very successful concert. And, as soon as people came to know, especially in Tamil Nadu, that T. Chaudhaya is coming to play, then literally thousands of people would assemble. Another great musician, G.N. Balasubramaniam, first he would always ask anybody who asked him to sing, he would ask, can you please get T. Chaudhaya to accompany me? So you can imagine that was the caliber. In fact, they were the days of chamber music. In chamber music, the four-stringed violin doesn't give so much of sound. Its volume is low. So it was Chaudhaya who actually added 3 more strings and made it into a 7-stringed violin, so that with the resonance, actually the volume of the violin would go much higher. So you can see what an innovative person also he was. So here he is in Coimbatore, and a very successful concert. And in that the concert was over. He comes home, and then when he comes home, immediately he goes into the room that was given by the host. He goes and locks himself up. And the host was worried. Why is this our guest is not coming for dinner? Then he knocks on the door and says, "Sir, please come. Let's have dinner." Then Chaudhaya says, "No, no, I'm not hungry. So you, all of you, please eat." And then, of course, in deference, all of them went and ate. And the whole of the night, from Chaudaya's room, some noises were coming. He was rubbing things and then pulling the strings, and then he was also playing here and there. And then slowly the host Srinivasarao gets up and then looks into the room, and then Chaudhaya was fully focused and concentrating on repairing his violin. So then he was going on, and at about 1 o'clock in the night, his violin, he fixes it. And then for the next 2 hours, every single kriti that he had played in the concert, he plays at home for 2 hours. 3 o'clock. And then he gets satisfied. At that point of time, it was close to 3 o'clock, and Srinivasarao comes and knocks again. It's 3 o'clock. You are still up. Then Chaudhaya says, No, I am fine. I am hungry. What can I eat now? So this is a beautiful situation where by Shastrabhyasa, the person is able to know where he failed. But note that nobody in the audience, 1,000 people who had seen, had found that his violin playing was anything short of the Chaudhaya standard. Only Chaudhaya knew. I think in one of earlier classes I was mentioning, we know our own Achilles heel. Our own Achilles heel is the vikshipta state of our mind. Who better knows? And how can we get this? This we can get by means of tapas. So what exactly is tapas? Constant study of ourselves, swadhyaya, unbroken study of the self. And that is done for a long time, abhyasa, as pointed out in the first chapter. Then the raging ocean and the waves of the heart becomes calm. So there again is the metric. As long as there is agitation in our heart, ekagra chitta we have not been successful in achieving the ekagra chitta. So then where do we start? The first and foremost is let us ask ourselves, what is the use of my body, this deha? This body is subject to birth, janma, old age, jara, mrityu, death, and vyadhi, sickness. So if you look at the body, this body is itself a big challenge. That's why our sages were saying, I don't want rebirth. This body which has got all these things is now in the hand of a dhimanta, a dhiman, an intelligent person. So what does an intelligent person do with his body? Is a question that was raised. He uses the body for two purposes. It's called bhukti and mukti. Bhukti means enjoyment of the world. Mukti means liberation from the world. So any intelligent person who can engage with the world and get good enjoyment from the body and has the skill to remove the body from worldly enjoyment at the appropriate time. If he is able to do, such a person is called a dhimanta. This I have borrowed from a beautiful text called Sangita Ratnakara of Sharangadeva. So Sharangadeva was a 12th, he was born in the 12th century. So a little background about Sharangadeva. 12th, 13th century India, it was a very dark period for scholars, for the learned, for the Hindus, for the Veda, for the Vedic tradition. It was a very dark period, especially in North India. That was the time when Islamic invasion was taken over, and the states that were affected deeply by Islamic invasion were the north and the northwestern parts, Punjab and Kashmir. So our hero Sharangadeva was born in Kashmir, and this was a period of Islamic cruelty. The Delhi Sultanate, which were also known for enormous amount of cruelty. So in the context of Yoga Sutra, what kind of a challenge was that? This is a adhibhautika tapa. We have talked about three kinds of tapas: adhibhautika, adhyatmika and adidaivika. Adidaivika is coming from fate. So there was no problem of fate. It is not adhyatmika because Sharangadeva and such similar Kashmiri scholars had no internal problem. The problem was externally, political problems. The adhibhautika problem. Adhibhautika problem also can add to whatever adhyatmika challenges that he can have. He is eager to bring out a definitive text on music and musicology. In fact, just as a sidebar, after Natya Shastra, the most influential book on fine arts is Sangita Ratnakara of Sharangadeva. So for any student of music and dance, study of Sangita Ratnakara along with the Natya Shastra is inevitable. You can see that was his influence. So what it does was in this period, he was born in 1175, end of the 12th century, and he lived to the middle of the 13th century. He decides to move away, to migrate. Yoga Sutra perspective. If our body is in an environment not conducive to ekagra chitta, we have got to move away from that environment. Let us say we are in a company, in a household, let us say, where there is too much of noise. Children, grandchildren, they all come obviously, and then you want to study, you want to contemplate, you want to do tapas. We have to take half an hour, 1 hour away from that noise. Otherwise, tapas is impossible. Because most of the time, what are the demands on our energy and resources? They will say that your family is very important. You have got to take care of your children and grandchildren. Yes, but we have to take 1 hour for ourselves. Otherwise, what happens? When we are young, we are married, all our energies are focused on our children and bringing them up. So 20 years of our life is gone in just nourishing and nurturing our own children. Then what happens? You are left with 5-6 years of time. And that 5-6 years of your time, you are very, very busy in our profession, making a career. Then our children will get married and they will get children, and now you start doing grandparenting. And in that grandparenting, you get so absorbed in taking care of the grandchildren that again you have no time for tapas. So, ekagrata is impossible in this vikshipta environment, and therefore for tapas, ekantata is also required. So, how to achieve ekanta? Again, you see our story of Chaudhaya. Chaudhaya travels all the way from Mysore to Coimbatore, and then he reaches there, 2.5 hours of concert, and then host want to eat, want to make him comfortable, want to have a conversation with him. So he decides to sit up and do ekagrata from 12 midnight to 3 a.m. What would I do? I would go to sleep. And this will be my routine day in and day out. So the story of Sharangadeva migrating from Kashmir to central India, he comes to a place called Devagiri, the present day Daulatabad, which is in Maharashtra. And at that point of time, it was ruled by the Yadavas, and the language there was Sanskrit and Kannada. It was only in 14th century and later that area became a Marathi region. But up to that, it was actually a Kannada country. And of course, Sanskrit also was very prevalent. And the king there, the Yadava king, actually his name was Simhana, he gives protection for him, and he writes the Sangita Ratnakara in that environment. So whether we do our tapas between 1 o'clock in the night to 3 o'clock in the night, or we move out into a more calm, peaceful place, such as Davis. So you can do that. I know your campus is very peaceful. One will achieve that kind of ability to control the Sharira and the Kriya Yoga. So therefore, Sharangadeva introduces Dhimantaha, the intelligent person, will use the body for the sake of bhukti and mukti. So how do we get bhukti, mukti? Tatra syat sagunadhyanat bhuktihi. By means of meditating and contemplating on Ishvara. Ishvara pranidhana, we get worldly comfort. How is it? Because Ishvara is the world. When we are doing Ishvara pranidhana, we are doing the worship of the 5 elements and the other people who are there. The social infrastructure is what we are worshipping. So you will get bhukti. Bhukti means enjoyment. And muktistu nirgunat. Mukti is by means of withdrawing ourselves from the hustle and bustle of the world. And therefore tapasvadhyaya Ishvara pranidhana is an important project for the Vikshipta mind. So without wasting any time, our teacher in the very first sutra, Tapasvadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhanat Kriya Yoga. Tapaha is this austerity, Swadhyaya is the study of the self. Study of the self means it leads us to the knowledge of the self. And since the self of the whole creation is Ishvara, Ishvara Pranidhana gives knowledge of the self. And therefore, this Ishvara Pranidhana is discussed in chapter 1 also, chapter 123, and it's also discussed in this chapter once again in 32 to 32. In 123, Ishvara has been pointed out as the Lakshya. So Lakshya means what? That is the object for meditation. So whenever we do tapas, we have got to have a Lakshya, and we also have to have a Niyama. Niyama means the process by which the Lakshya is achieved. And so in chapter 123, Ishvara is pointed out as the Lakshyam. And of course, definition is also given. But here in this chapter, we are dealing with Ishvara Pranidhana as part of a practice or niyama. So here is a very important Shastra point, that is, single idea can be used for different purposes. Ishvara Pranidhana is a single idea. That single idea, what are the different purposes? One is development of self-culture. Ishvara Pranidhana is a process in which the self is cultured and a discipline is introduced to reach an objective which is very far away and which is very difficult to attain. That's also Ishvara Pranidhana. So every day we do japa, every single day we do Gayatri japa, every single day we do puja, every single day, every single opportunity we go to the temple, every single opportunity we do help our fellow beings. That is Ishvara Pranidhana. And then what is the goal? The goal is also Ishvara Pranidhana. One of the unique characteristics of Ishvara Pranidhana is the process and the goal are the same. And then this self-culture, what happens is, first of all, it makes us fix the goal. So the goal that is given by Patanjali Maharshi is Kriya Yoga is your goal. And for Kriya Yoga, having fixed that goal, we have to devise the methodology, and then we have to design the practice, and we have got to actually apply that practice, and then we have got to realize it also. So to go through this, one has to take up a lifestyle of yoga. So first state in tapas happens is introspection. A very honest introspection of saying, what is my present state? I am in a vikshipta state of mind. So this vikshipta state of mind can be corrected only by means of self-discipline. And the method by which I can develop self-discipline is through the study of Shastra. And by the study of the Shastra, one of the most important thing that happens is that ahankara will become less and less. Because what does Shastradhyayana do? Shastradhyayana shows me how little I know. That is an extraordinary, sobering situation. The more and more I study, the more and more I realize how less and less I know. And accommodation happens in the mind for the sake of tapas. And this transition actually must happen gradually. We cannot suddenly do that. It's not just, okay, I'm going to give up everything. I'm going to give up my job. I'm going to resign from that. I'm going to abandon my children, my grandchildren, because I got to get Chittavritti Nirodha. You know what happens? If we try to do that, samsara will come back to us with renewed force. So what is the process? Add 5 minutes a day, add 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day. And this is why Nitya Karma Anusthana was introduced by our sages. We can be an extremely busy person, but 5 minutes of sitting in a peaceful corner and say 21 Gayatri mantras. And again, in that 5 minutes, to practice complete isolation of the mind from all entanglements. And otherwise, samsara will come back with renewed force. So slowly, tapas, what it does is, tapas and swadhyaya, Ishvara pranidhana together, it will slowly make a habit of that. And then this discipline, Patanjali Maharishi is going to talk to us about it, it leads to inspiration. Inspiration becomes possible. So in tapas is actually related to the will. With the tapas, we start getting some control on our will. Swadhyaya satisfies the curiosity of the intellect, and Ishvara Pranidhana will temper our emotions. So that's why in the beginning I mentioned that we have emotion, we have intellect, and we have got the world. All of these three things will be solved by means of tapaswadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana. So rightly, for a vikshipta adhikari like me, then for me what has happened is he has actually given me a tool by which my will can be controlled, by which my intellect is satisfied because of the study, and Ishvara Pranidhana also actually leads to emotional control, because all our emotions we invest in Ishvara. Because what is the main emotion we have got? It is the prema. All of us have got love for our spouse, for our children, for our parents, and for the society. And when that is extrapolated to Ishvara, then it becomes Parama Prema. Because ordinary prema gets transformed into the prema of the Paramapurusha. Paramapurusha prema is Parama Prema. And that Parama Prema is called Bhakti. And when the Parama Prema of Paramapurusha is achieved, our emotions come under control. So why did Patanjali call this as Kriya Yoga? Is the next question. Because as we know, in Sutra literature, no word is used without deep meaning. So Kriya actually refers to deliberate activities that produces anticipated, expected, determined results. So here is what happens. Number one, it is called Utpattihi. Utpatti means to generate and to convert. So what does it do? It converts our personality, which is not yet refined because it's in a vikshipta state. It converts it as a viable product to reach ekagra state. Similar to how you can convert a lump of clay into a pot. So to convert a lump of clay into a pot, you have got to go through all the processes, including heating. So this is called as Utpatti. So Kriya consists of Utpatti. This Utpatti has the Utpadya. That means what has to be the end product. With the end product in view, end product is to create a pot. That is the Utpadya. You cannot create a pot without clay. Therefore, you cannot create a ekagra mind without mind. And therefore, let us accept that we have got a mind. This is the reason why I said Yoga Sutra is only for normal people, not for people with compromised mind. Because as soon as the mind is compromised, somebody has got mental sickness. For that person, Yoga Shastra cannot happen because that mind does not have the capability of Utpadyatvam. So therefore, we have Utpad. So then, if this clay has to be converted into a pot, the clay has to be modified. So the mind, which is now Vikshipta, has got to be modified. And this modification has to go in a very proper, disciplined process. So the Shastra says there must be Vikaryatvam in the one that is the source. Vikaryatvam means what? Capable of change. So mind, is it capable of change? The answer is, it is capable of change, but it has to be done in a very progressive manner. So what is the progressive manner? First think, contemplate, tapas. And what do you think? You think on what basis do you use your thinking capacity? On the basis of Shastra. Then on the basis of Shastra, what else you should do? You should do Ishvara Pranidhana. In other words, the modification has to have step-by-step methodology. So Vikarya is just like we convert milk into cream, into butter and into ghee. We cannot immediately, straight from milk, it cannot become ghee. Similarly, the mind also cannot suddenly from Vikshipta state become Ekagra state. So Ashtanga Yoga is introduced. And it is a continuous process. But then everywhere we also have to see what did we achieve. And so the third aspect of Kriya is called Prapti. So first is Utpatti, which results into Utpadya. The second is Vikara. Possibility of Vikara is Vikarya. And the third one is, what do we reach? Actually, Swadhyaya, study of the scripture, what it says is, when you take up meritorious acts actually make your mind peaceful. The more and more, I read a beautiful book recently, probably Rao Garu, you might have read that. It's called The Go-Giver. Go-Giver is the title of the book. In fact, there are a lot of people who do go-getters, but this is a book about go-giver. It's a go-giver is where the more and more the person shares, especially the more and more the knowledge is shared, and whatever resources are there shared. In fact, the author speaks about a very beautiful concept of saying, the higher you reach, the more giving you become. In fact, there was an interview with Larry King in which he said people who have achieved the highest levels are the most giving and are the nicest people. So I'm sure many of you have come across really top, highly successful people. They're also very graceful. Though outwardly they may look, like go-getters, actually they cannot reach that stratospheric state unless they are also contributing a lot to society. And that is punya. Our Shastra talks about punya as going to Swarga. But here, according to Yoga Shastra, the real punya is how much of value I am to the society. And that is the prapti, that is the achievement of a yogi. Why should Sharangadeva travel a couple of 1,000 miles and to come and settle in a safer place? He could have just said, okay, I'm politically oppressed, I'm a Hindu, I am being punished by Muslims, so I'll go to a safe haven and then go and settle there. He could have simply settled there. Why should he write Sangeeta Ratnakara? Why should Valmiki write Ramayana? Only reason is, it is because their mind is such an ekagra state, they only think of Loka Kalyana. And Loka Kalyana is very much belonging to the present life and the present world. So that is the prapti. So what is the prapya, or the achievable? The achievable is the results of our meritorious acts and its influence on society. The more and more meritorious act that one does, which is part of the Kriya Yoga, the more and more relaxed we are. The less and less we are afraid of society. And then, so this happens through a process of refinement and purification. It is called as samskara. So again, utpatti, vikara, prapti and samskara is the next stage that happens. By samskara, then the karma that a person who is following Kriya Yoga, that karma becomes dynamic. He becomes ready for concentration and focus. So what exactly do you mean by dynamism? According to Yoga Shastra, this dynamism is first of all uplifting, utkshepanam. One of the things that Yoga Shastra tells is, one who is in this path of Kriya Yoga uplifts himself and uplifts his fellow beings. It's called utkshepanam. Avoids and prevents a downfall, because it is not like 2 steps forward and 4 steps backward. It is also avoiding the downfall. And thirdly, prasaranam, or there is an expansion that takes place. Then fourthly, there is also a reduction of agitation. Moments of agitation will become gradually less and less. And there is gamanam, or movement, tangible movement towards the goal. All of these things Patanjali Maharshi had in his mind when he prescribed tapaswadhyaya ishvara pranidhanani kriya yoga. And so in summary, one second please. Sorry, for a moment I was kicked out, I think. So in summary, second chapter is addressed to the adhikari who has got a vikshipta state of mind. And the purpose of second chapter is to lead the vikshipta mind to ekagra state. And for this, the first project is tapaswadhyaya ishvara pranidhana, and that's called Kriya Yoga. And the Kriya Yoga has a methodology to that. It is where the development of a personality from the gross to the subtle happens. And the contemplation, tapas, study of the scripture and worship of Ishvara has to continue. And now we will see what will be the obstacles that come in the way in our next class.